So this next video today that we're doing via in our series of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons for first edition, it's going to be about classes. In a previous video I had talked about the options of multi-classing and dual-classing characters. This one is going to zero in on what they call in second edition the priest class. In first edition, it's the cleric, and the cleric has a subclass of the druid. And yeah, this video is going to be about first edition, but I do just want to give a hats off, or tip of the hat rather, mention to second edition that they do have an interesting take on subclasses there. So in first edition, like I said, you have a class or a primary class or a parent class, and then the subclass. So cleric is the main class, and then there's two types of clerics, the cleric main or proper, and then a subclass of cleric called the druid. And they function very differently. There's also a fighter class with subclasses of ranger and paladin. And they are different too, though not quite as different, I would say, as the cleric and druid, but there are differences. A lot of similarities too, and that's why they're subclasses, but differences. And the differences are hard and fast. They're very hard delineations. In 2e or second edition, they have these major classes. So as I said, like for the cleric, instead of having a cleric class and druid subclass, they have a priest class. And then within the priest class, there's, I want to say like 11 or 12 spheres of magic that you can study. Magic users have schools. Let's stick with the priest. They have these spheres. And so if you're familiar with first edition spells in the player's handbook, you may have noticed, and actually I'm going to go take a quick look just to point it out and show you, that here, for each spell, there's like a school, or in the second edition they refer to these as spheres. For the priest class, there's these groupings, these categories that each spell falls under. So for instance, insect plague is part of the conjuration and summoning spheres, where raise dead is part of the necromancy sphere. Plane shift is alteration and divination and so forth. And they're really just kind of to spark your creativity as a dungeon master and player, those schools and spheres. In first edition and second edition, they found pragmatic uses for them and mechanics. And so what they did is they have this priest class, and there's the 11 or 12 spheres of enchantment and charm and alteration and so forth. And you as the character choose which spheres of study you're going to partake in. And then that determines what kind of a priest you are, what flavor of a priest. So they have most of the same cleric and druid spells all lumped together for the priest in second edition. And if you want to play something akin to the first edition druid, you're going to choose spells from, well, let's get to the druid spells, because offhand I don't remember the names of the spheres and so forth. So you'll see a lot of alteration, conjuration, and summoning that is part of clerics also. And so there's overlap between the spheres, the quote-unquote druids and clerics in second edition. But there are some spells that are druidic spells in second edition that are all kind of grouped amongst, let's say, 3 of those 12 spheres. And so if you want to play a druid-type character, you're going to go heavily into those particular spheres, and you'll still be called a priest, but you're playing a priest with a druid-like flavor to it. And then there's specialization. You can get limitations and bonuses for specializing in certain spheres or schools of magic. And I just found that to be a very interesting take. The differences that I could foresee, not having played much of 2e, But where the delineations between cleric and druid are, as I said, hard and fast, and you're playing one or the other, you know exactly what they can and can't do. In 2E, you get a lot more personal flavor. You can kind of express yourself in a myriad of ways in second edition as a caster, because you can be a blend of the two in any combination or ratios that you want. So I kind of like that. I think it's interesting, but I guess that's enough time on second edition. This is a first edition video. So yeah, we're going to go back and talk about the cleric class and subclass of druid. So I'm going to get to, let's see, this page here. And the first thing I wanted to discuss, so we're in the early parts of Player's Handbook. This is page 11, yeah. And it's talking about abilities, which is one of the first subjects they delve into in the Player's Handbook. And only because of the wisdom ability here, and this is pretty big for clerics and druids. So regardless of what class you're playing in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons First Edition, you typically want your primary abilities to be high. There's usually great benefit to having high ability scores in your primary abilities. Not the least of which is if you have, I think it's 15 or higher in most classes, in your primary ability, you get 10% to all of the experience you earn. That's significant over a lifetime if you're playing a campaign with that character. So that alone is good reason to have a high ability score in your primary ability or abilities. But sometimes, like with the cleric here, you get bonuses. Not only do you get the bonuses inherent to having high wisdom, which any class character can get, but clerics get a super bonus. They get additional spells that you see listed here for having a high wisdom, and they're cumulative. So, for instance, if you're a cleric who has a 16 in wisdom, from level 1 on, you're going to get an extra first level spell, a second first level spell. When you can cast second level spells, which means you're a third level character, you'll then get two additional second level spells as well for 16 wisdom. So you're getting 4 extra spells just because, that's per day, just because you have a higher wisdom. This applies to druids too. So at first level, a cleric would have 1 spell per day. A druid would get 2 spells per day. So let's stick with that cleric who gets 1 spell per day. If you have that 16 wisdom, really you only need a 14 wisdom to gain this. You're going to get 2 additional first level spells every day. So instead of 1, you're casting now 3 spells per day. When you get to 3rd level as that cleric, you get these additional second levels. So a 3rd level cleric, let's see how many spells they would get. 3rd level cleric would have 2 first level spells and 1 second level spell per day. But you get those bonuses. You're going to get an extra 2 first level and an extra 2 second level. So instead of 3 spells per day, you've more than doubled it. You now get 7 per day just for having a higher wisdom. So if you're playing a cleric or a druid class, you heard it from here from at AD&D Toolkit, from the Friendly DM, you want high wisdom, as high as you can get it, I recommend, but definitely at least 16, because you get those 4 extra spells. And as you can see by this chart, if you hit 17, you'll get an extra 3rd level spell when you make level to start casting 3rd level spells, and 18 wisdom gives you an extra 4th level spell. So really important to have a high wisdom as a cleric or druid subclass. You want to leverage that wisdom. All right, we're going to move on to races quickly. Not that this is a video about races, but they do factor into, you've got to choose a race that's appropriate for your class. Clerics can be either human, half-orc, or half-elf. As I've said in other videos, these parenthetical levels you see here are only for NPCs, non-player characters. So you can't play them. So you can be a half-elf, half-orc, or human. Half-elf maxes out at level 5 for Cleric. A half-orc maxes out at level 4 for a Cleric. Very low level, very limiting. So 9 times out of 10, you're going to want to play a human. They have unlimited levels. You can go up to 20 and so forth as a human class. So most Clerics, you want to play a human. Druid, slightly better, or actually much better. You're limited to only 2 races, half-elf or human, but they're both unlimited. So you can go either way with them. I would choose half-elf as a druid. I'll get into that when we advance to the druid discussion in a little bit in this video. But for now, I would choose half-elf. So you need to keep these race and class limitations in mind when choosing, if you're going to choose to be a cleric or a druid. Next, I want to go to this page. All right. This is going to show the die that you roll for your hit points for each of the classes. And you can see clerics and druids roll an 8, only superseded by fighters and paladins who get a 10. Even a ranger, which is a fighter subclass, is rolling an 8. So excellent hit points for both. Maximum number of hit dice. This refers to the level for each class where you stop rolling hit die when you level up, and instead just add either 1 or 2, generally, hit points to your current total each time you level. So, like a fighter, once they hit level 9, beyond that, they're just adding, I think it's 2 hit points every level, automatically. You don't roll dice anymore. Spell ability is pretty obvious. Clerics and druids, yes, both cast spells. And then is there a class limit? Now remember, there might be racial limits, but classes can also be limited. Druids cannot go beyond level 14. There's no limit to the cleric. And just a difference to note there. I think that's all we want from that table. If you're multi-classing, well, I'm not going to get into multi-classing. I talked about that in a separate video. You'll find that in the AD&D 1E tutorial playlist. So you can check that out if you wish, where I talk about multi-classing characters and dual classing in depth. Weapon and armor limitations for cleric and druids. You'll see druid by sheer number has a couple more. I'll get into the druid a little bit later. Cleric, very limited in the weapons they can use. It's just these 5. And you might notice what's glaringly obvious when you look at this for a couple of moments, if you didn't catch it right away. There are no ranged weapons other than like this throwing hammer. You could chuck that up to 3 inches, so 30 feet, 30 yards. It's really only maximally effective within 10. That's the short range for it. That medium range is up to 2 inches, and you're going to gain a -2 on your hit rolls there. And it only goes up to 3 inches, and at that range, the long range, you're getting a -5, which sucks. So you're really only chucking that hammer at a very short distance. Damage is pretty decent. I think they're 2 to 5 throwing hammers. But otherwise, you're fighting hand-to-hand or you're casting spells. So the lack of ranged weaponry is significant. By no means a game changer, but significant. Something to take of note. To counterbalance that, any shield, any armor, they can be as heavy as a fighter. So awesome. Very defensive. They can chuck in light oil. Can never use poison unless they're evilly aligned. As far as alignment goes, clerics are not limited. They can use any alignment they wish other than true neutral. Druids are conversely very limited. They can only be true neutral. So you want to keep that in mind. But as far as the equipment they can use, clerics are fantastic. They have a huge number of magic items they can use if they find them. Any armor, any shield. They're just really limited on the weaponry. And again, not for all intents and purposes, no ranged weapons. They can chuck oil. Same range, I believe, as a throwing weapon like a hammer. That's about it. Um, as far as these weapons go, I would say probably by far you're either choosing a flail or a mace. Club is going to do 1 to 6 damage. These do a little bit higher, the mace and the flail. Staff, again, 1 to 6. But the club and the staff, they're basic, wooden sticks. They don't do as much damage. Where they can be impactful, or at least the staff, when it comes to finding magic stuff, there are some cool, only a couple. Staff is more geared towards the magic user, but there are a couple of cool staves that can be used by a cleric, so that's a consideration for future proficiency. But otherwise, you're going to want to start with that mace or the flail. Right, and the argument here is no edged weapons. Pretty sure this is not rumor. I think it's, I'm trying to think where it was written, but in any event, pretty sure it says somewhere no edged weapons because they don't want clerics drawing blood. It's part of their religious beliefs. I'm not sure if that's if that is actually documented somewhere. I got to find that out now. But in any event, they can't use the edged weapons. My pet peeve with that has always been the flail. It's basically a spiked ball on a chain. That spike, not an edge, but it is piercing. And as you can see, these other weapons don't really pierce. So, kind of a little violation, I would say there, but we learned to live with it. Probably the biggest reason I had a problem with this growing up is I always forgot the flail. Always thought of it, it's a piercing weapon as much as a bashing weapon. And I always thought they can't use piercing or edged weaponry. And so I always forgot about it. It's probably just a little personal pet peeve that I need to get over. All right, so then we're advancing to the cleric class description here. And I want to point out, first off, the experience required to level up. The cleric is surpassed only by the thief, which I believe 1250 is required to hit level 2. 1251, actually, where the cleric needs 1501. The only exception to that I need to double check is possibly the monk. So I'm going to look them up quickly. No, monks are quite high. Okay, I thought for some reason they might be low at low levels, but they're not. All right, so yeah, clerics are great as far as leveling up. They level up quickly. I'm going to show you 2 here. Let's see, Advanced Dungeon Guide. I need to get into the 70s. Page am I on? I need to go back a few pages. I want to get to the attack tables. Or characters. No saving throws. We'll get to that in a minute. But here, attack tables. Alright, so you might have heard of FACO. To hit armor class 0, that's an acronym for that. So there's a big, there can be a big argument between first edition and second edition players. Where did FACO originate? So FACO, I'm going to say it was used, and it's actually the term is even used in first edition. Second edition really cleaned it up and solidified it and took credit for it. And you're calculating on the fly, or it's easier to calculate on the fly what you can hit, what armor class. Well, for armor class 0, what roll is required on the D20, and then you just extrapolate from there for different armor classes. Whereas in first edition, DMs are more referencing these tables. And the first edition people would say, well, these tables are built on the same concept of FACO used in second edition, and in later parts of the DMG, there's these giant listings here, and of course they're sideways, listing all the monsters out, their hit dice and armor class and so forth. They actually have a column here to hit armor class 0, which the acronym then progressed to FACO. So yeah, FACO was in first edition. cleaned up, maybe organized and explained better in second edition is how I like to think of it. Hope you don't hate me for it if you play second edition, taking credit away, but that's how I see it. Those are some of the facts as I know them. So in first edition, you have these attack tables. And if you're not familiar with first edition, this would be the opponent's armor class. All right. The DM is going to know this. And then this axis here, the top row, is going to be the level of the character. And this table is for clerics, druids, and monks. So a cleric who is level 1, 2, or 3 is going to use this column. They're going to find the armor class of the enemy they're trying to hit. So armor class 4, a first, second, or third level cleric would need to roll a 16 or better on the 20-sided die to hit that armor class 4 enemy. So a good way to start comparing, because again, this table here is for clerics, druids, and monks. This matrix or table is for magic users and illusionists, fighters and paladins, down here thieves and assassins, and so forth. Clerics have, I would say, the second best attack table. And the way you can compare these is starting out with armor class 0, which again, where Thaco comes from. Look at the rolls they need at these levels and compare them to other tables. So a level 4 cleric needs an 18 to hit armor class 0. Level 4 mage needs a 20. Level 4 fighter, paladin, rangers, they need at level 4 an 18, just like that cleric. Level 4 thief needs a 20. So you got to extrapolate out to higher levels and then different armor classes to really make a comparison, because you'll see clerics advance by 3 levels to a new factor. Fighters are the ones that are better than clerics. They advance every 2 levels. Mages and magic users are the worst every 5 levels. Thieves, second worst at 4 levels. So clerics attack well. They have a good chance of hitting, almost as good as the fighters. So that's just another bonus to clerics. They can wear excellent armor. They can use shields of any kind. Very limited on weapons, but they're very effective in hitting with those weapons because they have those great attack tables. Excellent hit points, second only to the fighters again. And I'm just going to skim through the narrative description of them here. You're going to get that 10% experience bonus if they have a 15 or higher in wisdom. Race, again, very limited, and you're not hardline limited to human, but effectually you kind of are, because those half elves and half orcs have such a tight level cap on them. Hit points are fantastic. Clerics need to choose a deity. As a DM, I like all my character classes to choose deities, but it's pretty much mandatory for clerics. Clerics get their spells each day by praying for them. And first and second level spells, they kind of get automatically. Third through, I think it's 5th, maybe 6th. No, it's 5th. Third to 5th level spells, they need to have the spells bestowed upon their brains each day by praying to a lesser god or demigod of their primary god, their main deity, a greater god. And you can read about these gods in this praying system in more detail in the Deities and Demigods book. But so they need to pray to a lesser god or a demigod to get those 3rd and 5th level spells. And so by that time, you need to make sure as a cleric you've been worshiping appropriately your deity, because if not, or particularly if you're acting out of concert with the expectations of that deity. So if you worship a lawful good deity and you're a lawful good character, and you've been murdering some innocents, very, very quickly, I would say as a DM immediately, that demigod is going to let you know they are not happy, and that your god is not happy with you, and probably refuse to give you those 3rd through 5th level spells you're praying for that day, and then some. There's going to be some recompense there. By the time you get to 6th and 7th level spells, which are the highest level spells for clerics, You're praying directly to your deity, the greater god. And if your god that you worship is not a greater god, you're by the book, deities and demigods, you're not even supposed to have access to 6th and 7th level spells because only greater gods can bestow them. And you better be seriously worshiping your deity, doing their work on the earth and so forth, or you're not going to get those spells. And it gets way worse from there. They might just murder you outright if you get really bad. I'm not going to get into that too much here. Again, you can read about that in Deities and Demigods. It's early on in the book. Pretty easy read, interesting read. I like it, particularly if you like mythology, and most of us do if you're playing this game. So I would check that out. But yeah, as a cleric, you do need to take into account your deities and pay homage to them. Your dungeon master will tell you what's required based upon their campaign. Here they're going to talk about spells, and mostly the spells of a cleric revolve around protecting and healing your friends. Druids similarly, though they are more attack and crowd control based, I would say their spells, more offensive in nature. I'll get into that again when we talk about druids. Here they're talking about the undead, and something very cool pertains to clerics only. And when I say clerics, I mean the primary class. Druids, and this does not apply to. Actually, it's not clerics only, it's clerics and paladins. They have the ability to deal with undead in a unique way that's very similar to like exorcism. It's called turning, where you turn the undead. And then Dungeon Master's Guide, here's the table for it on page 75. So this is a list of undead characters, or undead monster types. And they advance in potency. So skeletons are the simplest, lowest level, easiest to deal with, I would argue. And goes up to ghast, and then vampires, and the lich, right? The lich is the top of the undead tier. Beyond that, you're getting into demons and devils of higher caliber there, under special. But so this turning, like I said, it's kind of like an exorcism, except it's not like it's done in the movies where you got, like in The Exorcist, the girl tied in the bed and the priest is spending days trying to exorcise this devil or demon. It's something you do almost instantly in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. You need to have your holy symbol with you. You're gonna hold, as a cleric, you're gonna hold that out in front of you, between you and the undead you're dealing with. So let's say I'm a low-level cleric and I'm dealing with a group of skeletons. And my party is injured and hurt, or for whatever the reasons are, I don't want to deal with them in a hand-to-hand or just any kind of fight here. So I want to try to turn them. And when you turn the undead, they take every effort to get away from that cleric as quickly as possible and as far away as possible. They're just scared to death of them. And so they want to take off. Benefits here are great, and many. You mitigate the risk of injury or death here because you're getting these undead to run away. At the same time, you get the same amount of XP for defeating them. As a DM, if you haven't, you should teach your players that they don't need to kill every adversary to get experience for them. You need to defeat them. That can be turning them. That can be tricking them. However you defeat your enemy, if you defeat them, you get XP for them. And just as much as if you killed them. So turning is great. It's like an instant win. Turn it on the switch when you're dealing with undead. And again, saving you the potential risk of damage, death, just using up resources like spells and potions. So it's great. How it works is you take the level, the top axis here is the level of the cleric. Like I said, paladins can do this too, but we're going to just deal with clerics. Paladins, very simply, they operate 2 levels less than their actual level. So they can't even turn until they hit 3rd level, because 3 minus 2 is now 1. So at 3rd level, they operate as a 1st level cleric. If it's a 6th level paladin, you're going to look at the 4th level column here. But otherwise, clerics Just look for the level. So first level cleric here needs to roll a d20. If they roll a 10 or higher, they succeed in turning away those skeletons. Second level needs a 7 or higher. Third level needs a 4 or higher. You'll notice after the numbers, we now have letters. And the key down here tells you what they mean. T means instant turn. So a fourth level cleric instantly turns skeletons, no roll necessary. Sixth level, they not only turn them, but they destroy them. They disintegrate on the spot or evaporate or go up in flames, but instantly destroy them. And D star, so what that plays into is, if you look down here, you're going to see that typically a cleric can affect 2 to 12. So you're rolling the d6 2 times, 2 to 12 of these creatures. So though a fourth level cleric instantly turns a group of skeletons, you can only turn 2 to 12. And every time you attempt a turn, you got to roll the 6-sided die twice. And that tells you how many. So if there was 13 skeletons here, I'm instantly turning 2 to 12 of them, but there's going to be at least one that I failed to turn, and I got to deal with. What this asterisk means here is instead of 2 to 12, it's now 7 to 12. So you get a greater number guaranteed to be affected when you have that little asterisk here. Right, you're rolling that 6-sided die only one time and just adding 6 to it. So a greater number are affected. Never more than 12 in a group can be turned by a single cleric, though. So there are limitations to it, but it's a great ability. You want to make sure your cleric's employing it. The only time like I can think of not is if you needed something off of that undead. If it's got some kind of equipment you needed, or if you're collecting skeleton bones for some reason for a quest or whatever, but otherwise, turn baby turn. And you'll see how the numbers get more difficult as you go up in the difficulty of the monster here. But this is your cleric turning table. Very potent. Druids cannot do it. It's only cleric and paladins. So big difference there between the two. Big advantage, big reason for choosing a cleric over a druid. Though druid does have some of their own. What else? This talks about the attack table and so forth, and the hit points that we've talked about already. Magic items, as I told you earlier, clerics have a good number of magic items they're allowed to use. Clerics do attract worshippers, henchmen, and so forth. They can build a stronghold. We talked about the leveling here. They level very fast. So I think that's all I want to look at. The spells. If you're not familiar with how spells work, this is the level of the character of the cleric, and spells are grouped into level of spells. First level spells are the simplest, quickest to cast generally, least powerful generally, seventh being the highest. They're the most powerful generally, and so on. But this is the number of spells per day they can pray for. And then if you were to go a little bit further on in this manual, you can find the listing of spells. And so here's all the spells available to the cleric class. I'm not going to go into them today, but just as I said earlier, they mostly are about protection, healing of friendly units. Though there are some crowd control type spells and some attack spells even. So all in all, the cleric is very potent. Well, actually, before I finish up, I do want to show two in the Dungeon Master's Guide saving throws. There's our saving throw table. Here we go. Clerics have the best saving throw ability. So again, This is the level of the class, so 1st through 3rd level clerics, 4th through 6th, and so on, broken down into fighters, magic users, and thieves. And then this axis, the x-axis, would be the type of save they're making. So whether they're doing a saving throw against being paralyzed, poison, or death magic, a staff or wand, and so on. This is the roll required on a d20. You need to roll a 10 or higher to save against poison. At level 1, clerics got a 50-50 chance already saving against poison. Where the other classes you'll see a 16, 14, 13. These do vary by class and the type of save you're making. For instance, a cleric does a great save against poison, 3 higher against petrifying or polymorph. Where a fighter is only 1 higher. The difference is only 1 between poison and petrification. So the type of save does work against the class or with the class, depending on the class. It's not a 1-for-1 advancement. But overall, clerics get the best saves. Their level advancement is quick, 1 to 3, 4 to 6. Only fighters advance more quickly, but the base numbers are lower for the cleric, so yeah, they're just fantastic. On saving throws. Additionally, wisdom factors into saving throws against the mind for all classes. So inherently, clerics are, are better at saving when it's a mind attack, like ESP or a command spell or a suggestion spell. Those types of spells that impact the mind, clerics are going to get, not because they're a cleric, but just that clerics generally are going to have the highest wisdom, usually in the class, the cast of characters in that party. Because they have such high wisdom, they get that bonus, which is pretty significant. I'm going to go back in the PHB. Actually, I'm in the wrong book here. I'm going to go back to the wisdom table here just to show you the bonuses. Level 15 wisdom, you get a +1 to those magical mind attacks. 16 is +2, 17 is +3, and 18 is +4 on your saving throws. And here they actually list them out. So usually characters that are not a cleric, not always, but usually they're not going to even reach 15, and so they're not getting that bonus. And so that's why I said usually it's clerics that are going to have those bonuses for the mind attack resistance on saving throws. But I guess that's all we're going to talk about with the cleric here. Just summing it up quickly. Any armor, any shields, very limited on weapons, particularly no ranged weapons. So the weapon is where they're really hurting. Their attack tables are great. Their hit points are great. So they are an excellent all-around character. I love recommending them to people who are new to Advanced Dungeons & Dragons because they're not squishy. They have the best armor. They have very high hit points. They have a diverse amount of attacks and defensive postures they can do between the weapons and armor and spells. Don't forget their spells. And if you listen to the friendly DM and you make sure you get a high wisdom, where you as far as you can make sure, then you're going to get bonus spells. They're a lot of fun to play because they can get into hand-to-hand because they have high hit points and armor. They do get a lot of spells, especially early on. Your magic users are dealing with 1 or 2 spells. Your clerics, if you have high enough wisdom, you could have 3, 4, 5, 6 spells. It's awesome. They're a great class to play. Parties love them because they're resilient and they've, got all this protection and healing magic that they can use on the party. That being said, keep in mind, Cure Light Wounds, it's a level 1 spell. It's your bread and butter. Cure Light Wounds, you need to touch somebody to use it. So it can be a little tricky in combat. You got to be next to the person to touch them. But you're rolling the D8, and that's how many hit points you're healing on whoever you touch. If you have this wisdom bonus, like if you've got an 18, so you're getting two extra first level spells, you're at level 1 cleric. You can prepare 3 cure light wounds every day. That's huge. Don't squander it. There are some other good level 1 cleric spells. Your party's looking for those cure light wounds. Make sure you got at least one of them every day. Not a problem to double or triple up on them either. But so that essentially is your cleric. We're going to move on to the druid now. Druids do partake in this wisdom bonus. So just like the cleric, you definitely want to have high wisdom for a druid. A caveat to the druid is, and I'll show you that when we advance through the pages here, when I get to the druid narrative. Druids also need a minimum 15 in charisma. So that's pretty significant. A lot of players look at it kind of like as a waste, because you get a 15 or higher, they don't usually want to put it into charisma of all things. Charisma is valuable depending on how your DM plays their campaign, but it's hard to see, hard to leverage, unless again the DM is running a good campaign where charisma becomes valuable. A lot of times it's overlooked. So it's something it's a consideration that you're going to be putting a high score in charisma. And it's not really pragmatic for the druid, other than in higher levels where that charisma finally can give you some benefit in that they can attract more followers. So a definite consideration. Moving on, they do have some great spells, druids, and I'll show you those again as we scroll through the pages. They are a cleric subclass, and so one thing to make sure you're aware of, like I said, that bread and butter I was just talking about, cure light wounds for clerics, druids don't get that until 3rd level, because it's a 2nd level spell. So they can't cast it as often. They don't get it right away like a cleric does, so you want to keep that in mind if you're going to play a druid for your party. If you're the only healer, there's no other cleric. It's something you need to consider. At low levels, you guys are not going to have curing ability, healing ability. But they do have more offensive spells, more powerful offensive spells. I think their spells overall are better and more powerful, though they are limited in some ways. One, again, you don't get the cure light wounds early on. But also, their spells are nature-based. Druids are all about the woods and animals, the outdoors. So their spells, quite a few of them, and some of the powerful ones, are dependent upon, are you outdoors, in nature? Like Entangle, fantastic low-level, first-level spell. It's crowd control, tangles up the enemy in numbers of them. But you need to be outdoors and around green stuff. You need to be around vines and trees and whatnot that can entangle, wrap up the enemy. Can't use it in dungeon very well, if at all. Some spells are also dependent upon the weather, like Call Lightning. Powerful spell, can knock the enemy for a loop, but there's got to be a storm nearby in order to call that lightning down. So another thing to keep in mind when choosing a druid, their spells and the context in which they can use them. All right, we're going to advance here a few pages. I did review, I'm going to show you this here, yeah, that when considering race, druid, you can be a half-elf or a human. Human, they're both unlimited in the spell level they can achieve. And because of that, usually it's that level limit that, for me, dictates what I want to play. When we talked about the cleric, right, that's such a low level limit. I wouldn't want to be a half-elf or half-elf orc cleric unless there was some RP value to it I wanted to leverage. but not the case with the Druid. They're both unlimited. So I actually would advise the reverse here, that I like the half-elf Druid. One, I love elves. The RP value is greater in my mind. But demi-humans get some bonuses that I'm going to show you a little bit later, like infravision, that humans don't get, that are usually counteracted by the level limits, because you don't have your max level on a half-elf character. Play a half-elf Druid. I love them. But here, it's actually only a couple of pages, so I'm going to point out while we're on the subject. Here's the half-elf. So a half-elf character gets 30% resistance to sleep and charm spells. So, like everyone else, they get to do a saving throw where applicable to spells cast on them. But before they even get to the saving throw, they're going to roll the percentage dice. And if they roll 30 or less, they make a save against any sleep or charm spell and don't even need a saving throw. They just resist it inherently. And so it has no effect on them. Elves have this too. I think it's 90% for an elf. But we're talking about the half-elf Druid here. So this is a great bonus that only comes into play with sleep and charm spells, so not all that often. But can save you, can save your party if you actually can stay up when everybody else has fallen asleep here. So great little bonus for them. They also get additional languages, again, inherently, just being a half-elf. Not the hugest of bonus, but every little bit helps. And you can parlay with these creatures if you come across them. You can understand gnomes, even friendly ones and halflings if they're talking in front of you. But if you want to parlay with goblins or hobgoblins, orcs or gnolls, or just translate, if you're hiding in secret and you're hearing a group talking, you can translate, you know what they're talking about. It's effective. It can be. So another little bonus. As I said, they have infravision, which is great. Any character with infravision is fantastic. I can't think of any situation that it can hurt you in. Infravision is not all powerful. There are limitations to it. Light that gives off heat can spoil it, but doesn't hurt you in any way. It just makes it ineffective, but you got the light, so you don't need the infravision. Infravision is great. Great bonus to have. Don't undersell it. And then there's this ability here where they can passively spot concealed and secret doors. Some other demi-humans, well, I guess a half-elf is not truly a demi-human, they're a half-breed. So dwarves and elves, for instance, have a greater ability to do this, but even half-elves, if they merely pass within 10 feet of a concealed door, they will detect it. They don't even have to be looking for it. They just walk by it. There's a 1 in 6 chance they're going to see it. If they're actively looking, meaning they go into a room, it's a dead end where they didn't expect a dead end, and they're like, there's got to be an opening here. And so they tell the DM, I'm going to look around for some kind of portal. Now they have a 2 in 6 chance as a half-elf of finding that. And secret doors as well. These bonuses, finding concealed and secret doors, the infravision, they're basically freebies for a half-elf as a druid. Because again, usually the limiting factor or the downside of choosing a non-human is that you have a level limit. And half-elf doesn't have that. So I love the half-elf druids. There are a couple of things on the downside you would say to consider. For instance, a half-elf doesn't get along so well with a half-orc. There's a chart for that in the races, I guess, further back. Things like that, I consider them minor. Doesn't outweigh the pros of being a half-elf druid. Nothing wrong with being a human. I like the half-elf. Moving on from there. Page 19, I think. Yes. Druids get the same D8 as the cleric. They continue to roll that beyond level 9 up to 14, so their hit points can be greater up into 14, because a cleric is, I think, only adding 1, maybe 2 hit points per level after 9. So I would consider that a win for the druid. You're not often getting beyond level 14. What else do they show us here? I don't think much difference between the cleric, so we've already discussed that. Weaponry and armor, big differences here. Druids can only wear up to leather. So, padded leather, that's about it. Shield, they cannot use beyond the wood shield. It's effective. Gives you the same armor class improvement as any other shield does. But a wood shield only blocks 1 attack per round. And after that, it's ineffective. So that is a limitation. So their armor and shield much more limiting than the cleric. But their weapon choices are greater. First thing to stand out for me here is this sling. A sling, obviously, ranged weapon, right? They got a couple of others, like you can chuck a dart and a spear and a dagger, and they got the hammer, just like the cleric does. But you've got a legit long-range weapon they can use. A sling has great range. Beyond the short bow, I want to say it's as good as a longbow. I think it surpasses the longbow, possibly. You know what? Well, I should put my money where my mouth is. We're going to look quickly. So here, page 38, Player's Handbook. With a bullet, you get greater range. You get up to 200 yards, the long range with a bullet. Only 160. Yeah, only with a stone as your missile weapon there. Longbow is 14 and 21. Okay, so not as good as the longbow, but very close at the long range. And pretty good still at the medium range. It's as good as the composite short bow. So a sling, particularly with bullets, that bullets are basically just metal forged into a projectile for a sling. Very cheap, usually easy to come by. The only benefit of the stone is you could pick them up off the ground. So with a sling, I mean, that's another benefit. You can almost never, it's almost impossible to run out of ammunition for a sling, because you can just always pick up a rock. But bullets, very cheap. They do a little more damage, and you can see much better range. Lightweight, so I would advise you're a druid, you're going to get the sling. Stock up on bullets. Don't be afraid to carry a bunch of them. In a pinch, you can pick up a stone. Great weapon. The bullet here, I think it does 2 to 5 damage, and the stone does 1 to 4, if I'm correct. Yeah, here's our damage. So let's see. Sling bullet does 2 to 5, yeah, and 1 to 4. Large creatures, bullet does 2 to 7, where the stone still does 1 to 4. So definitely stock up on those bullets. Like I said, not much heavier, very cheap, significantly more damage, significantly more range. Great weapon, the sling. So a druid comes out way on top from the cleric when it comes to ranged weapons because of that sling. Actually, I didn't talk about this with the cleric. I'm going to point out quickly this little table here while we're here. I should have. Weapon proficiency. So classes can be proficient or trained in weapons. Fighters get the most. They start at 4. Clerics are at 2. The only other class besides the fighters that surpasses them is the assassin subclass, which a lot of DMs don't even allow to play because they're tricky. I'm not going to get into a lot of the reasons why. It mostly deals with alignment issues. But in any event, number of weapons is 2. So the cleric and the druid can each train in 2 weapons to be proficient and to start. Meaning if you want to use, so for instance, let's go with this druid here. They can use a scimitar, a staff, a dagger, and so forth. You got to choose 2 of them that you're going to be proficient in, or you can choose 2. And let's say I choose the sling and the staff for my druid. If I find a magic scimitar and I want to use it, I can, because a druid can use a scimitar. But because I'm not proficient in it, I'm going to have a -4 penalty on all of my 2-hit rolls. So that's a problem. It's only -3 only. It's -3 for cleric, -4 for the druids. The druid loses out there between the race and the cleric versus druid. Fighters, you'll see, they get more starting weapons and the penalties are -2. So it is a consideration, not a huge one, that clerics, if they go for a non-proficient weapon, have less of a penalty. The other bonus to the cleric here is every 4 levels, this 2 goes up by 1. So a cleric can become proficient in another weapon, where a druid takes a little bit longer. Once every 5 levels to gain a weapon they can become proficient in. So though the druid gets a greater range of weapons they're able to use, their proficiency in those weapons is slightly worse than the cleric. So it is a consideration. So we're going to go back to where I was. So the weapons for the druid are better. Sling, fantastic. Another great weapon, the spear. All right, you'll notice the druid cannot use the flail or the mace. Excuse me, that the cleric can. But they do have a scimitar, which does 1 to 8, I believe, against both medium and large damage. So you could argue, I guess, on par with the mace and the flail. Just a different type of weapon, different type, it's a slashing damage versus bashing. But you have the spear here, which is slightly less maybe on damage, just 1 to 6 against medium, and I think 1 to 8 maybe against large creatures. But a spear is very versatile. It's got a much longer range, so if anybody is like charging you, you've got a longer range on them, greater chance you're going to hit first. A spear can be prepared to receive the charge, unlike most other weapons. A spear is the best at it, actually, at receiving the charge of an enemy. Fantastic weapon for that. Because of the length of it, often DMs will allow you to, as a druid, stab over the head of like a gnome or a halfling in front of you, if the enemy is taller in particular. So you can be at range, have another friendly in front of you. So if you got yourself a little gnome fighter standing in front of you, you, the druid, can stand behind them and stab over their head. And the enemy is likely to engage with that gnome who's closer and slashing at them with some kind of weapon right up in front, in their face. And you, the druid, can more safely attack from the rear with that spear. I love spears for druids. You can even chuck a spear. It's a hurled weapon, so like the hammer I talked about with the cleric, very short range, but in a pinch you can chuck that thing. You want to make sure you got a backup weapon, I would think, or at least have some spells that you can use if you're going to chuck the spear, but you can chuck it. So very versatile weapon, good damage, great range, not particularly heavy. They're everywhere, ubiquitous. You can find them in all kinds of shops. So a great weapon for the druid is the spear. So yeah, they're going to win out here on the weaponry, I say. Even though the cleric has got a slight edge on proficiency, just the fact alone that the druid has a ranged weapon is a big plus, and I love that spear. And they got more, greater number of weapons. And they do have access to the staff when it comes to magic stuff. And the dagger. You're going to find, I would say, a lot more magic staves and daggers than any of these other weapons that the cleric has, the mace, hammer, flail, or club. So druid wins out for me when it comes to weaponry, though they lose out big time on the armor and shield. Moving on, we're going to get to the druid class narrative here. Actually, before I do that, the XP needed to gain levels, slightly higher for the druid, so you're going to level, the advancement is a little slower. And again, they are capped at 14, where clerics can advance beyond that. Not too many campaigns do level that high, so not usually a concern, but you do have to keep it in mind. And something even more important than that, you'll notice that the levels here the titles are named at level 12, Druid, Archdruid, and Great Druid. The reason for this is there's a limited number of them. I don't think the initiates, pretty certain, they're not limited in any way. The higher ones might be. They might be. Not sure on that. But definitely the Druid, Archdruid, and Great Druid are. Great Druid is only one of them, and there's limited numbers of these guys. And to advance to, say, a Druid, there are not fewer than 9 characters of Druid level. Okay? So when you're 11th level and you get the experience to advance to 12th, that max number of 9 cannot be exceeded. So what you need to do is seek out one of those other Druids, and you need to defeat them. You don't have to kill them necessarily, but you got to defeat them. And then you'll supplant them. You become one of those level 12 Druids, and that other level 12, which is usually an NPC, is dropping down to 11th level. You've beat them, you've surpassed them, you're now amongst the very exclusive ranks of Druid. And there's only one Great Druid. So you've got to beat the existing Great Druid for you to become the next Great Druid. Huge honor. Would be awesome to say I'm the only Great Druid in my campaign, right? But not easily done. So you got to keep that in mind too if you're going to be getting into double digits with Druids. Spells on par with the Cleric, though they do get more of them. As I had said earlier, spells, I consider them better and more powerful spells than the Cleric. I like them. When it comes to anything other than healing, I guess, Clerics do make better healers, per se. But where the Cleric starts with 1 level 1 spell, the Druid gets 2. So the Cleric advances from 1 to 2 to 3 spells in the first 3 levels. And the Druid is 2, 3, and 5. So they get significantly more spells than a Cleric. So the Cleric is more versatile in that they can engage in physical combat because they got the heavy armor and the shield. But to kind of counterweight that, the Druid gets more, and I like the spells better. So I generally tell people new to first edition, if you want to be the healing protector type, now decide, do you want to be more involved with physical combat, more resilient, because you have, more armor and so forth, or do you want to be more on the magical end? And if you want to do the magical end, consider Druid. Druids also cannot turn, right? That turning ability is huge for Clerics. So big loss there for the Druid. And now getting into this narrative here that describes them. The first thing you want to consider, again, you need charisma, 15 or higher. That can be a problem for some people, 15 or higher to be a Druid. You also need that for your 10% bonus. Druids are the protectors of trees and animals. They will not kill wild animals if it can be avoided. They won't destroy trees if it can be avoided. So this can be a problem if you are out in the wild and you're adventuring with your party and you come across some aggressive bears. Druid's not going to want to fight them if it can be avoided. Maybe your party does. Doesn't mean they won't in a life or death situation, but they don't want to. And as the DM, you've got to enforce that. Typically, the deity that a Druid's going to be worshiping is going to have the same sentiment. And so if your Druid is wantonly killing animals, you've got to penalize them for that, and rather quickly, and I would say strongly, as the dungeon master. So those are some of the limitations. They do get some bonuses, though. They can identify plant types, animal types, and whether water is pure or not. That can be helpful in certain situations. They have the power to pass through overgrown areas. So if there's some area that your DM, say, has blocked off with thorny bushes, and the group can't get through, well, the druid can. They have immunity to charm spells that relate to woodland creatures like dryads, nixies, and sylphs they list here. So again, if you're a half elf, you get that 30% save or resistance against any kind of charm or sleep. And it goes even further here. With woodland charms, you're completely immune as a druid. So very hard to charm a druid. Huge one that's often, not, I can't say often, I guess, sometimes overlooked by new players. They either forget about this or don't know about it. Actually, I've been thinking about my teams, my campaigns. I've got a party member, a low-level one that's a druid, and she hasn't done this at all. And she's new to D&D, AD&D, so I need to bring this up to her again. But they can change shape up to 3 times per day at will, not really limited other than that 3 times. And they say you change in all respects other than the mind, so they're still cognizant of who they are and all that. But otherwise, in all other respects, they can become a bear. Becoming a bear can be huge. The first thing is, bears are big, bears are strong, bears do a lot of damage. They can take a lot of damage. But also, when you change form, where I think it says it here, yeah, each assumption of a new form removes 10 to 60% of hit point damage that's been done to the druid. So it's healing to change into a new form. There are some limits. You can only change into each type once per day. So type here, reptile, bird, or mammal. So the first time in a day you change has to be one of those 3, reptile, bird, or mammal. Say it's a reptile, I change into an alligator. Next time can't be a reptile. It's got to be either a bird or a mammal. So it's a limitation, but you can work around it. Each of those has some pretty fantastic choices, I would say. Birds for escapism. Reptiles and mammals have some, tanky creatures like alligators and bears you can change into. So great feature, great ability of the druid that you must keep in mind, I say, if you're going to play them. Definitely need to be leveraging that. Druids have their own language, plus these additional languages, which when I talked about races, not huge, but definitely effective. The half-elf, right? They get some extra languages, and then druids get extra languages. A half-elf druid can be conversant in quite a number of languages, especially if they get high intelligence and they can add more. They could be the C-3PO of your party. This talks about armor, how they're limited, can't use metal armor. Metal interferes with the nature essence of their magic. Druids do get +2 on the saving throws against any type of fire or lightning damage. So you definitely want to keep that in mind. That can be effective, especially the fire-based. They get a large number, like clerics, of magic items they can work with. And then lastly, I think this is just talking about those named levels of Druid, Archdruid, and the Great Druid. I'm trying to think, is there anything else about Druids that I want to offer to you? Like where we talked about, I think I showed you the attack tables. Yeah, I did. The attack tables are the same for Druids and Clerics. Saving throws are the same, other than Druids do get -2 against fire and lightning. So that pretty much, I guess, sums up the Cleric and the Druid for you. Some of the bonuses and negatives between the two. They're both great classes. I love the two of them. I tend to advise people new to AD&D a little more towards the Cleric, only because they are less squishy. more forgiving classes to play. But the Druid's not like a mage. You know, they are a little more protected, a little bit of armor. They can use a wood shield, more hit point, double the hit points. So they're not nearly as squishy as magic users. So you don't have to be as afraid as a DM letting a new person play a Druid. And particularly if they do like magic, offensive magic, you might want to steer them in that direction. So I hope this video was helpful. I hope it was enjoyable. And the next one I put out should be on the next grouping, probably the fighter classes I'll be doing next. I'll see you in the next video.